Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are really digging into the ultimate kitchen question. What makes a dinner roll perfect?
It's the big one.
It is. We've stacked up 6 very different recipes from, the old school marathon rises to these modern super fast solutions to figure out the science behind that perfect, tender fluffiness we all want.
And our mission today is really to move beyond just following a recipe. We want to give you the core principles of yeast roll baking.
Okay.
We're going to decode that classic kitchen trade-off between speed and quality. By the end, you'll know exactly how your choices in fat, liquid, and most importantly, time decide if you get a dense, moist roll or a light pull-apart bun.
All right, let's unpack this. We've got sources from King Arthur, all recipes, Betty Crocker, and a few specialist bakers. It's a fantastic cross-section of approaches.
It really is.
Let's dive straight in with the foundational stuff, the ingredients that give you structure, texture, and of course, richness.
Richness is the entire game when we're talking about soft rolls. A lot of the sources, especially the classic ones, mention the need for a rich dough.
And what does that mean exactly?
Well, unlike lean doughs, which are just flour, water, salt, yeast for things like, crusty baguettes, soft rolls need high-fat ingredients, milk, butter, eggs.
Right.
That fat coats the gluten strands. It stops them from tightening up, which is what gives you that incredibly tender, almost melting texture inside.
And looking at our sources, that richness is usually coming from dairy. Angie's recipe, a few of the homemade versions, they all specifically call for whole milk.
They do, and that choice of milk versus, say, water fundamentally changes the roll. Milk adds fat and sugars, which helps with browning. If you use water, you tend to get a chewier, harder crust.
So recipes that use water, like the quick yeast rolls, they have to be compensating somehow.
Exactly. They usually load up on a different kind of fat.
Okay, let's talk about that fat swap, because this is where a really critical choice comes in. The quick yeast rolls recipe, it specifically calls for shortening instead of butter.
It does.
Why do that? I mean, butter adds so much flavor. What's the structural benefit of shortening that makes it worth it?
It all comes down to the melting point. Shortening is 100% fat, and it has a much higher melting point than butter.
Which has water in it.
Right, so butter melts really fast in a hot oven. The source for the quick yeast rolls confirms that because shortening holds its shape longer while the dough bakes, it actually helps the final structure get loftier, fluffier before it sets.
So you sacrifice some flavor for height.
A bit, yeah. But you maximize the airiness, especially in a quick bake recipe.
That's a fascinating trade-off.
Ah.
But while most recipes are stuck on butter versus shortening, we found this one incredible outlier, the Amish dinner rolls from King Arthur.
Oh, yes.
They throw starch into the mix.
1 full cup of plain, unseasoned mashed potatoes. It sounds a little strange at first, but it's brilliant.
So what does it do?
The potato starch acts like a moisture sponge. The source explains that it helps the dough absorb and hold on to water without getting dense or tight. Basically, it stops the flour from drinking up all the liquid too fast.
So wait, the Amish rolls are specifically credited with staying power, staying moist for days. Does that mean that every other roll, the ones just using butter and milk, are really only at their best on night 1? Is that the trade-off?
In essence, yeah. Rolls made without that kind of starch additive, they just tend to dry out much faster. The moisture isn't locked in. The potato acts as a humectant, keeping that structure tender for way longer than a standard dairy-rich dough ever could. It's the genius of that classic technique.
Okay, that gives us a really clear picture of the ingredients. Let's shift to the other big variable, time. This is where the whole speed versus quality battle really happens.
It is. These recipes range from a quick, 90-minute sprint to an almost 5-hour baking marathon.
Let's start at the far end of that spectrum. Angie's perfect dinner rolls, clocking in at 4 hours and 35 minutes.
Yeah, you have to ask, what is a baker getting for that kind of commitment? Is that sacrifice of time really worth it?
4.5 hours for dinner rolls. That is a serious commitment. What is the ritual there? What's happening with the rise?
It's the triple rise. After the first big fermentation, you punch the dough down, and then you repeat that entire rise step 2 more times.
Yeah.
And that long process isn't just about making the roll bigger, it's about flavor and texture.
How so?
Stretching the rise time lets these complex organic acids develop, so you get a deeper, slightly tannier, more complex yeast flavor. It also gives the gluten plenty of time to fully relax, which maximizes tenderness.
Okay, so you have that marathon. Now let's contrast it with the speed demons. We have the classic dinner rolls done in 1 hour and 25 minutes, and the quick yeast rolls about 1 hour 30. How do they compress the timeline that much?
They rely on specific tools and temperature. The classic roll recipe uses rapid rise yeast, and it completely skips the long first proofing. It uses a shockingly short 10-minute rest after mixing.
Just 10 minutes.
10 minutes. And the quick rolls use just 2 brief 30-minute rises and then compensate by baking at a super hot 425 degrees.
So what's actually the difference between rapid rise or instant yeast and the traditional active dry yeast?
It's mostly how it's processed. Active dry yeast has to be activated. You dissolve it in warm liquid first, which takes, 5 to 10 minutes.
Right.
Instant yeast or rapid rise has smaller granules, so you can mix it straight into the flour. It just cuts out that initial proofing time and lets the dough get to work immediately.
So if you're going for speed, technique must become even more critical. You're moving fast from mixing to the oven.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And this is where things can go wrong. The most common cause of a dense, heavy roll, whether you rush it or take your time, is simple kitchen inaccuracy, flour measurement.
That detail is stressed in so many of the sources. Why is measuring flour the silent killer of fluffiness?
Well, if you just scoop your measuring cup directly into the bag of flour, you can pack in up to 25% too much.
Oh, wow.
And all that extra flour just soaks up the liquid, and you end up with a dense, dry dough before you even start kneading. That's why bakers are always saying to either use a scale or do the spoon and level technique.
Okay, and what about the kneading itself? I always struggle with that line between soft and slightly tacky, which the sources all call for, and just a sticky mess.
The simple test is the feel. The ideal dough should be manageable and pull away cleanly from the sides of the mixing bowl. If you poke it, it should spring back a little.
And how long does that usually take?
Usually about 5 minutes. And if you're using a stand mixer, one tip says to cut that time in half since the machine is so much more vigorous than your hands.
Okay, so once the dough has risen, shaping becomes key for that final look. We found a great tip about preventing those ugly cracks on top of the roll. It's all about surface tension.
It's an essential detail that people often miss. When you're rolling your dough into a ball, the advice is to constantly pinch the edges of the dough down and tuck them underneath. You're creating this small, smooth, taut skin on top.
And why does that little pinch prevent cracking later?
Well, as the roll bakes, the yeast creates gas and the dough expands. If the surface is loose, it's just going to break apart unevenly. But creating that taut membrane seals the edges and makes sure the roll rises upward smoothly and evenly without splitting open. It's what gives you that professional-looking smooth dome.
That tip alone is worth the price of admission. And we also saw this base dough is really versatile for shaping.
Absolutely. Beyond just a round roll, the sources give great options. Betty Crocker shows how to make cloverleaf rolls. You put 3 little balls in a muffin cup.
Oh, yeah.
Or you can make crescent rolls by rolling the dough into a circle, cutting it into wedges, and rolling them up. Sally's Baking even mentions you can adapt it for knots or hot dog buns.
Let's wrap up technique with the final step. Baking. We know the quick rolls bake high and fast at 425. How does that compare to the richer, longer rise doughs?
Those richer doughs, like the Amish or homemade versions, they prefer a more moderate 350 to 375 degrees for maybe 20 to 25 minutes.
And why is that?
That lower temperature lets the inside cook through completely without drying out all those rich ingredients. But no matter the temperature, the common finish is brushing the hot rolls with melted butter right when they come out of the oven.
But for a specific look, we saw a pre-bake step mentioned.
Correct. For a golden, slightly crustier top, like on the rosemary pull-apart rolls, you brush on an egg wash and sprinkle it with sea salt before it goes in the oven. That egg wash gives you a deep, rich color and a nice sheen.
So knowing all these variables, from the fat you choose to the rise time you commit to, the final challenge is how to apply this to real life. For big gatherings, convenience is huge.
And what's so great is that almost every recipe, even the marathon ones, has a make-ahead strategy. It's the key to managing holiday baking stress.
So what's the best way to pause the process then?
The most reliable method is to refrigerate the rolls after they're shaped but before their second rise. Cover them tightly, and they can rest in the fridge for anywhere from 4 to 16 hours.
But there's a catch, right?
There is. The critical step people miss is that you have to take them out of the cold and let them warm up and finish rising at room temperature for another 1 to 3 hours before you bake them. That final proof is non-negotiable.
So that final proofing is the hidden time sink you have to plan for. Okay,
Yeah.
What about adding flavor? We know we can put rosemary in the dough, but what else?
You can treat the dough like a savory canvas. Many sources suggest adding powdered herbs like garlic or onion powder, dill, thyme, right into the flour. You can also mix in fine shredded cheeses.
Like Parmesan or cheddar.
Exactly.
Is there any cheese to avoid?
Yes. Avoid super soft or high moisture cheeses. They can mess with the dough's structure and hydration, and you can end up with a gummy roll. So stick to harder, shreddable types.
Got it. And finally, let's talk scale. The yield on these recipes is all over the place.
That's a good sign of how versatile the recipes are. We saw recipes that made just 8 rolls for the quick yeast batch, all the way up to a massive 36 rolls for Angie's or the rosemary recipe.
Mm.
It just proves that once you understand the base method, that ratio of flour to rich ingredients, you can scale it up or down pretty easily.
This deep dive has really laid out the mechanics of a perfect dinner roll. Mastering it means understanding that richness, whether from milk, butter, or even mashed potato, is key for tenderness.
Mm-hmm.
But you also have to choose your battle. The fast and hot method that relies on instant yeast and shortening, or the slow and low triple rise that's all about developing flavor.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire difference between a light pull-apart roll and something that's dense like a biscuit really comes down to precise flour measurement and respecting the rise time.
Right.
If you ignore those two things, all the rich ingredients in the world aren't going to save your texture.
The challenge now is deciding if you have the patience for the full flavor of the triple rise, or if you're going straight for the Speedy Demons method for quick comfort. You have the principles, the choice is yours.
Before we go, we spent a lot of time discussing how the starch from mashed potatoes helps the Amish rolls retain moisture and stay fresh for days.
Right, and we learned that's what gives them that incredible staying power.
Indeed, it's a fascinating chemical function. So think about this. If we know that specific starch helps hold moisture and prolong freshness, what happens when you start experimenting with other, readily available, slightly sticky starches in your kitchen?
Like what?
Like leftover cooked rice or maybe finely ground day-old breadcrumbs. What if you incorporate those into your base dough? Could that lead to entirely new textures or maybe just extend the shelf life of even your quickest butter-based rolls?
Hmm.
Something for you to chew on this week.